Hello Campo, Luca here. So this is your under 11s training support plan for the forthcoming season. So I've outlined some tools that are going to help you with the processes over the course of the season. I've outlined the plan, and you're also going to have then your own under 11 schedule, which I'm going to record a video for you, and I'm going to share that. So then you'll have two videos, two separate documents, one which will be obviously the mechanisms in here, and your other one is going to be your training schedule. The training schedule will line up with the sessions that I've already sent you and are already on the YouTube links, and that's what I want you to really consider over now the course of the season working with your players. So within this, I've just opened up with a little quote there: failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I just want you to think about that when it comes to planning your sessions, your considerations, what you want to get out of the sessions, how efficient are we in setting up and making sure we're organized. So if the session's at 6 o'clock, for example, and I know it's going to be different when we move to winter training, and obviously there's going to be teams on before and after us, but whilst we're training on grass pitches out of the local parks at the moment, it means that we can have that space and time to get there a little bit earlier and to make sure we're setting up. So for example, if the session was at 6 o'clock, if I had that, I wanted it to be set up for 5:20, 5:30 latest, which would give me half an hour then before players arrive, just for me to have my bibs and cones organised in their own separate colours on the side. And it means that if players start coming early, I'm there to welcome them. They can start having an arrival activity, i.e. passing the ball in 1-2s, as you saw in last night's session when I came and supported you with that. And we can just have little discussions if parents want to catch us before the start of the session, which allows us just to have efficient and effective use of our time. So here's our under 11s roadmap or timeline for the year ahead. So September to December is going to be your time in the league where you're going to look at learning and team cohesion. So again, as we discussed last night, your team and how that looks already for the year ahead, our rotational system, and it's the whole objective is about bringing that team together, making sure that they have relationships, that you're developing an environment that is suitable towards them. So just giving them that feedback like we did last night, make sure that they're understanding what the objectives are of the team, making sure that we can keep working with them. There is going to be some times where we lose across these 3 months and it can be a little bit difficult and the boys might be a little bit deflated. But over that period of time, that means that we just need to have some discussions with them. We utilise how training is going, so we create an environment where they know they're learning, that we can try and pinpoint learning objectives for certain players. So for example, our striker up front last night, if we're struggling as a team and we're not winning games, is he scoring? Is he getting assists? Is he pushing up? Is he taking some confidence off the goals that he is scoring? And can we do that for all our individual players for their different roles on the pitch? And therefore their overall confidence will come up and it will start to lead to draws and wins, and therefore that collective period after December will become more of a positive one. But for September, December, 3 whole months of games and sessions is all about learning and bringing that team together and setting out the standard that is about learning and gaining match experience. Now, after Christmas in January 25 to March, that's when we have the second period of the league. I know it ends in April, but that gives us another 3-month focus then to try and get a bit more competitive. That can we set a new objective? So for the first half is going to be all about learning and bringing the team together, and the second half might be, well, there's 10 games left, can we win 50% of them? And that's just a little objective, and it doesn't matter whether you achieve that at the end of the year, because it's a learning process as a grassroots team to and enable the players for their competitive league in 2025 to 26, and we need the players to learn as much as possible to bring them together and to be set up in a strong position ahead of the next season at under 12s. So for right now, this whole under 11s is all about learning. So we want to try and get that competitive edge in them after Christmas a little bit. We want to try and enhance that team cohesion, and we want to try and get them in a mindset whereby, right, this is the league, this is what we've learned, we now want to be competitive. And then we look at player development over the course of April. So again, that is going to be looking at our last month of league games. So again, oh right, our striker up front, can you look to score 4 goals in 4 games? Now, sometimes we might consider the pressure we're putting on that player, but it just gives us a little target and a learning objective. So if he doesn't score 4 in 4, why hasn't he? Is he being pressed? Is he being marked? Is he not in position? So he might be deflated at the end of that objective, but that means we can go into training and look at what our tournament games are over May and July, and to look to have as much fun as possible, to look at that team cohesion, to look at that downtime, to have that recovery, but to also consider the work that we're going to be doing with him in the year ahead as well, but to try and give him that confidence back, and to know that he has done well by scoring 2 and 4 in that last month, and to look at his overall season and go, right, you've scored X amount in X amount of games, you got X amount of assists, you started X amount of matches, you had X amount of minutes, and it just gives us a really good opportunity to feed back to the players on what they've done from this season. Here is a more detailed, comprehensive 24 to 25 timeline that I really want you to come back to. And I really want you to either print out this page or to have it stuck up for your year ahead. So September is that first step. So obviously the first game is up and coming on Sunday. That is our first step into league football. And some of these players have never played league football. So considering they're 10 and we have some players who might start at 5s playing league football at under 6s, or even they're allowed at under 7s, for example, those under 7s have almost 3-4 years experience compared to a new under 11. So for these first steps, it's really critical for them to understand it's all about learning. It's about having fun and gelling them together as a team and getting them to really learn for that year ahead. So under 12s is going to be a bit more competitive. Under 13s is then going to be a step up, and 14s. And then no matter what that player motivation is individually, then it allows us a long-term plan on the short-term presence that we got here to really have an impact on these players. So we want to introduce them to the league. We want to get them set up playing against other teams. We want to support players. We want to set the objective that is all about learning, and that links in then till the end of November, end of December. So we're learning from league football. We have continued fun as well over this period. So it's not just about the league games. Can we try and make sure training is a bit of downtime, is a bit of a breather, is making sure that our players can relax? So again, like I said to you at training last night, we need to try and get as many touches in training as possible for the team to have for their competency, for them to be really fluid with the ball, to start developing their technical skills. So what they may lack in a league game, for example, they can really pick up on a training session, and to have those touches as much as possible. And that is our opportunity to have that team cohesion by having fun in training. And now the schedule that I'm also going to record is that I plan in a games night at the end of every month, and that's where you want to have as much fun. Don't focus as much about having a real structured training session. All about the games that night. Can we have some fun? Can we get some learning objectives in there? And just about picking these players' confidence up a bit, picking up the morale of the team, bringing them back together, especially if they're going through a tough phase where they've lost a few games, maybe heavily as well, maybe coming up against some real competitive teams who have been playing together since under 7s now and have 4 years on your new team. So 4 years compared to 3 months of football, that team is going to be, significantly ahead, but that's where you start to bring that team cohesion and that learning objective into a real space. Now, January, obviously, we come back a little bit later for league football, but this just means that we can have a bit of a phased return after Christmas, have a bit of fun by going, this is the new year, this is our new objective. Can we try and get some little fitness elements in there for the younger players? And I know it's not all about fitness for all of our players. And I know when you look at, say, your game and your training in 1 week, you're not really going to impact the fitness of these players too much unless they're having their own personal motivation. They're doing it at home, they're doing it in their free time, for example. So there are some elements we want to set the standard by going, right, we are going to have fitness achievements in there, but that'll come naturally through what you do within your training. So again, it's a balance between grassroots football, new players coming in and setting some learning objectives, some standards, and just even setting them up, because again, in those years to come, and they might have the motivation to go and play academy, to go and play senior football, to go and play youth football, and then that's where they have all those learning objectives which you've given them, i.e. fitness, which they can really take away, as well as that lifelong learning. Now, again, February to March, we want to be challenging. So that objective that I said, first part of the year, September to December, is about learning and bringing the team together. The second half might be a bit more competitiveness. So we want to really have two objectives for the year, and we want to challenge and push on in the league. Again, April's about bringing that confidence up, like I've mentioned in the slide before. And then May is all about tournaments, having fun, rotation of the squad, playing players in new positions which they haven't played for the league season. We might have an opportunity to address some learning points from this year and to go, right, little Joey hasn't played in this position. He's expressed an interest. Can we do this in the tournaments between May, June, and July, and even August time? Can we look at pre-season planning, and then we look at the year ahead? So it's a very simultaneous, seamless plan, which is very straightforward for the year ahead, and it means there's lots for us to achieve. Now, what is our team strategy for the year ahead? Well, we want to develop teamwork, a sense of belonging. We want to set some goals. We want to make sure we got learning, and we want some principles in there. So it's only there's 5 areas there. Unfortunately, I've labelled that 4 and 4, but there's 5 there. Now, teamwork, we want to ensure that the players understand that they need to work together and work hard for each other. So that's going to come across your entire season and how you bridge that together. A sense of belonging, knowing that they represent the team, knowing they're doing this in a positive way, praising them for being on time, praising them for being in their kit, for example. Now, some players have come straight from school, they've had a long day, etc. So therefore, they might not have their training kit exactly, and they've just got whatever, maybe nan or auntie or maybe granddad or parents have just grabbed very last minute because they may live some hectic lives. We know how busy they are. And it's okay if they're not in their training kit all the time. It's just about making sure they're in a session. So, great to see you tonight, Joe. I'm really happy with the game that you had on Sunday. You've done this, and this really well. And just having that as soon as they come onto the pitch before training, they're going to be in a positive mindset to train. And they might have received, a real tough criticism in school over the week for, their own learning. And this does have an impact on their motivation, their training levels. But it just gives them that sense of belonging. I play for this club. This is what I want to really do well. And setting that standard on match day as well. So making sure that they are punctual. Making sure they're there for the warm-up. Making sure they're taking part. Making sure they're there early for training in the summer, etc. when we're on the parks. Our goals, so I've already spoken to you about this. First year is learning and team cohesion. The second part is about being a bit more competitive. We want players to have their own decisions in terms of what they want to achieve as well. So a player might come to you, little Joey, Campo, I want to score 10 goals this year. Okay, that's a good objective, a good goal for yourself. How are we going to do this? Do you want to play up front? Can we rotate the squad a little bit? How can I support you in doing that? And what can you do as your own individual commitment to training away from what we do here at the club that you can work on? So you might do some shooting at home, and that's where you have discussions with the parents and make sure it's all about learning and really having cohesion with your parents, and not just having some of the formalities which we see at football is when a parent comes with a bit of criticism or perhaps some negative feedback. Okay, we deal with that, but we want to try and create an environment where it's all about that learning, which links into the 4th strategy point there, where we want to make sure players understand that they're learning at all times, whether that's across games, whether it's across training, and making sure that environment is set up. And our principles, again, that links in with belonging. That links in the kind of team that we want to be. So again, we discussed this last night at training, that players understand that they turn up on time, that they work hard, they show respect, and that they're cared for. And therefore, principles that you might show at all times within your team. Now, I've put in a bit of methodology and training objectives here. This is a bit more of a detailed, not overly detailed, but a bit more of an oversight with some level of information which you can take away. So there's 4 different pillars here, and I want to underpin it with the learning objectives across all of them. And now I've only taken some basic areas that I want the team to focus on for the year ahead. So I want them to look at some passing. I want us to look at individual defending. I want us to look at tackling. So looking at how we do that as a unit, as a team, how we do that individually, making sure that we got safe tackles in there, understanding when they're making them. I want us to be running with the ball. So again, that competency, those number of touches, those warm-ups which I showed you last night, and within that, their control will come from it. And control will allow us to look at passing. It will look at the opportunity of running with the ball, being more confident, building that confidence, and it will set us up for some new methodology for the year ahead, whereby I might put some shooting in there. Now, shooting will come naturally across all the training sessions, especially with SSG, especially with some of the technical stuff that we might plan in for the year ahead. But if we focus on some of these areas as core focus for the year, then we can develop that again next year. And again, this is only grassroots football with some very young players who are accessing and learning the game at all times. So I really want us to consider breaking this down step by step for some really young players to try and give them the best support. Again, print this page off, come to me with questions, ask me anytime, whether that's across message or whatever. I will support you with this, but it's really straightforward, I believe. So technically on passing, we want to give the players opportunities for working within units, opportunity of individual passing. So are our players getting an opportunity to receive the ball in training? Are they making a number of passes? Who are our players not making the passes? So are the wingers running with the ball more than they're passing? So that's why that objective links in with that one. This is why I want us to focus on these areas so we can work with these attacking players, that we can bring them together, that they understand that they can't always win a 1v1 and they might have to pass the ball off and go and receive it after running past the player and receiving it in another area of the pitch, for example. Now, defending 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, individual and build up play. So there's going to be lots of that within our technical focus. And it doesn't mean that we just have to do 1v1s, 2v2s sessions. It means that we can do it within a passing exercise that in the technical part of the session where there is going to be lots of 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, etc. That there is going to be that build up play that I just mentioned. That it gives individuality towards the tackling, towards running with the ball, towards then looking at dribbling with the ball, towards beating players, and these are going to set us up for so much more across the whole year, and we're going to see so much more within training. But these are just some of the core basics that I really want us to consider. So types of tackles. Can players have a standing tackle? We don't want them to, go down injured. We want them to not injure other players. This links in with our principles. But we also want them to have a standing tackle, when to be in position, and it will create that awareness and pitch geography for that year ahead. Now, there's a lot of detail which is coming out from this, but it will naturally, in that level that you start to coach them over the year ahead. Running with the ball, so unopposed, that means that we're going to have opportunities to just, sessions where there aren't going to be any defenders, so we might just have a technical piece of the session. So we might have half an hour, 15 minutes of that is going to be unopposed. So we might be running at mannequins, we might be running through cones, we might then develop that or transition that into a opposed practice where the mannequin becomes a defender, where a player has to run through cones and then try and beat the defender and go and score, for example. So that's how we go from unopposed to opposed. That's how we transition effectively. But I want to look at lots of unopposed practice, which we can get players competent with the ball. We can get them understanding how to gain that control, how to take touches, to bring it close to them. So there's a lot within that we really need to support the players with in our training sessions. So when they're on a game day, that competence and that opposed practice will come naturally in a game environment. And then we address that by becoming more technically able within training. And then we look at the SSG for opposed practice. So it's trying to provide that perfect balance, which is really going to support the players across training and games, that you're going to have to lead on, that you're going to have to manage on. And again, I will support you across the season in any training session that you want at any time with this. We want players to look at the tactical elements. So again, this is how match day relates to training. We want them to look at SSGs within our training sessions, maybe passing patterns, how we start to look at build-up play, how we play out from the back, how we take kickoff. So again, last night we had a passing pattern from our kickoff because we transitioned very, very well into attack straight away from a kickoff in a positive manner where we're not playing long ball, where we have a chance to break the lines. So we might not give that information yet to the players where we're talking about breaking lines, etc., because we want them to really understand that they're just movement off the ball. We want them to understand how to build up as a team, and then we can start to layer in the technical terminology over the course of the year and towards next year as the players understanding of the game in terms of their game understanding, their game intelligence starts to evolve over that year. So some players might have a good knowledge of the game, so they understand that it's a basic game of football. There's 2 goals, there's X amount of players, you have to score, you have to not let goals in. That's knowledge. Now your game intelligence will be, actually, am I breaking lines? Am I moving around the pitch to provide support for the units? Am I in a position where I can affect the game? And some of our players, again, last night showed that intelligence, and it's how we layer that on top. But some only are in that knowledge stage, and we have some work to do to get them there. So that's why defending, positioning, awareness of the pitch, awareness of the role will start to go from knowledge to intelligence over the feedback that we give them, over the work that we do with them. And we do this over the course of the season in these 4 areas which are really critical. Now, the rest of it is pretty straightforward. You can read through it yourself. Again, any questions, just come to me with a message, a voice note, ask me at training, etc. But the psychosocial there, for example, is one that I want you to consider. And this will, again, link in with everything that we do in terms of the first objective. So we want the team to, we want group work. We want them to be working in smaller teams during the SSG. We want them to come together as an overall squad. We want 1v1s. We want 2v2s. We want lots of fun. We want players enjoying it. We want players smiling and laughing. We want to generate fun and players interaction at all times, and they might struggle with that on a Sunday, on a game day, but how can we bring that into play during a training session? We want practice to be fun. Now, when I say reward system, that doesn't mean going out and saying, right, you're going to get £1, you're going to get an ice cream, you're going to get this, right? It's just a little bit of fun. So if you complete this run within 1 minute, you gain 1 point. Now, if 5 players on one team gain that, they might start the game 5-0 up. Now, the other team might be really disheartened, so you might say, right, if Joey on your team, who is 5-0 down, scores the first goal, it will count as 2. So then the other team start going, oh, well, why does that count as 2? Well, you're 5-0 up. So it gives that little balance and competitive edge that one team wants to keep the lead, one team wants then that player to score and try and gain that comeback. But it's also, you don't want the player just to have the ball all the time to try and look to score. So if he does it straight away, that means then, actually, if you get 5 passes now and then score, that will count as 2 goals. So you start to change conditions a little bit across the course of that session. That's how you lead and manage your sessions, and that's how you create a very equal, very fair, and a fun practice if delivered in the right way. It is critical that that session is delivered to meet the needs of all these players. Now, there's learning objectives per each of the columns across these 4 areas that I really want you to consider. Now, the physical considerations will obviously have an effect upon the conditions in terms of weather, the number of players we have available, in terms of what environment we're playing on, whether that's grass, whether that's 3G, etc. Winter will have that impact. So do we want to do lots of running with the ball in straight lines, having players waiting around in winter when it's freezing cold? No, that's not going to be very good physically. So how can we develop our technical focus of that practice to make sure players are moving at all time to consider those physical considerations, which they're also aware of, but we're managing as a team as well. Just to touch upon that, we might also have, some bigger players in the squad, whether that's taller, whether that's a little bit wider, they might have a bigger frame, etc. So we have to consider, if we're doing 1v1s, for example, what the impact on terms of that psychosocial, that in terms of one player being knocked by confidence, by one player trying to come up in confidence by beating that player by pace over time, for example. But if we've got someone very new, and remember, this is considering the demographic which you have in front of you, right? And you understand the squad, and I'm talking from a perspective that we know the squad altogether. But if little James runs up against, Joey, who is quite big, he might not want to do 1v1s again and knock his confidence because he cannot beat that player initially. So therefore, he might not come back to training next week because he's been off-put by it. So it's about giving him that confidence and managing it effectively as the lead coach. Now, again, this document is so important. I cannot emphasize the importance of this document. So I've given you some problems, some descriptions to go with that, and some solutions. So how do we monitor player development? Well, I said to you last night in an observation where our striker, I gave him some technical information, and he was pulling off and scoring goals for fun at the end of last night's session. So how did we see that progress? How did we monitor that player development? Well, actually, he started to score from the information that I've given him, and before that, he wasn't scoring very often or not at all. So we've actually observed that progress in a training session, and we know that his technical ability had improved across the course of that session, and even to the point where the parent fed back and said they were so pleased to have actually seen that progress in that session, which was really pleasing. We want to ensure that we're creating competitive sessions. So this will come naturally over a period of time. This will come in the environment that you create. We want to do this with a solution of having fun at all times as well, making sure that learning objective is underpinned, making sure that there is team cohesion. Now, again, what I said in terms of that physical and that competitive sessions, they will really relay into the generation of high intensity sessions. So your problem is to create that, or you might not have that high intensity right in front of you, but how do you do that? What are your expectations? Is it okay for players to turn up late this training? Well, if they're turning up late, okay, there's going to be consideration, traffic, parents finishing work late, auntie, uncle, granddad now might have brought them, never been there for the first time, you know, they might have had a after school club, and we consider all that, and that's okay. But there might be players who literally live around the corner, walk the training, and they're late every week because they're just training. Well, actually, we want to get there early to be focused and have that arrival activity to go straight into the warm up to set the standard for that intensity that we're going to have for the rest of this session. We want to make sure that learning environment is highlighted at all times. That's why I consistently keep coming back to that message. Again, make sure sessions are fun and welcoming. Exactly what I said at the start. If we're set up for 1:30 and training is at 6, then that gives us half an hour to welcome the players who turn up early, to have some fun at the start of the session. So we might set a little crossbar challenge. So for any players who might arrive at 5:45, they might have a crossbar challenge till 6, till the other players turn up, and then we might have an arrival activity, for example. Or that might be their arrival activity. So you might have one or two turn up really early, crossbar challenge. Right, there's a few more turning up now, still early, so I want you passing in pairs. Then you go into your warm-up, for example. And make sure you're building on that player-coach relationship at all times. That in your squad of, say, 16, you're not just focusing on the first 8 players or the first 10. You're focusing on 16 players at all times. Even if you've got in your head a vision of how you want to play, maybe the competitive edge for the under 12s, maybe looking at some of your regular starting players, we have to look at rotation. We have to make sure that we're having positive relationships. We have to make sure we're feeding back to players at all times. Now, again, this relates into a bit of a strategy, which I've already spoken about earlier on, but this is a different sort of view of what you need to be looking at. Right, come back to this. Have I developed the learning environment? Have I set my clear objectives? Is the team developing cohesion? Am I developing those coach relationships? Have I been supportive? And is the environment a caring environment where the players care for each other? So if someone goes down injured, has he gone straight over and shook his hand, or tried to help him get back up, or to try and have some sort of communication or conversation between the players themselves when that scenario arises? Now, a lot of what I said is a little bit repetitive because that's what I want to hammer home the message, and it's about approaching this very clearly but having the detail to go behind it, which then looks at your coaching strategy for the year ahead. Again, this is very straightforward. You can read through this, ask me questions again. Now there's a little bit here which says about using a coaching wheel. That comes up a little bit later on, and I think I demonstrated, or I know I demonstrated the use of it last night at training. So those interventions where we go and speak to a player on the pitch, or we bring a player over to us, that's a coaching intervention. We give them a bit of feedback. There's also opportunities where we've demonstrated the players. There's opportunities where we had players demonstrate for us. We had concurrent and terminal feedback. So concurrent is, very good, Joey, you've received the ball there, now go and beat him. And remember what I said about the shit sandwich and how we use that as well, and what we really need to do to build upon that, and that example that I've given you. We also want to give that terminal feedback. So again, bringing the group into us, just having a little breather. What they might do, we might give terminal feedback over transitions and them doing drinks, for example. So we use different types of feedback, which will come up later on in this guide for you. But that is the coaching wheel effectively in a very basic use for the type of level of players that we have. Okay, so this is a conceptual map that you as coach will have to come back to. Are problems occurring during sessions? Are we creating problems that allows players to problem solve and find solutions to develop their game IQ, their game understanding, to really come together as a team, to develop their leadership, to have individual scenarios where they can learn from it and apply it in the SSG of the training, of a match day environment? Is the learning environment a problem in terms of that it doesn't exist? Or how do you create it to be a learning environment? What do you really need to do to address this? How are we challenging players? Individual players, are we setting challenges for them? Well, for example, we saw one player last night pull off and score loads of goals. His challenge now might be, right, I want you to take on the goalkeeper in a 1v1, and I want you to score with your weaker foot. Now, that is a big challenge for a player that we're talking about, but that is the kind of example of a challenge and how we can step up. We look at the conditions of players in that session. We want every player to develop technically first and foremost, whilst having fun and looking at that four corner model. So the bit at the start where it looks at physical, psychosocial, tactical, and technical, that is your four corner model. As a coach, we must challenge every player and we must be able to condition sessions. So, for example, if our striker last night is scoring too many goals during session, can we condition him to use his left foot only, so he cannot use his right foot for shooting? And his challenge is to score 3 goals in a 1v1. Now, that's the difference between a condition and a challenge, and what we set our players up within that session. The sessions themselves, this comes down to the environment that I keep hampering on about. What problems are you creating for the player? So again, those scenarios, those learning objectives. So for that player using his left foot only in a 1v1, that's a problem for him. So he's going to have to learn whether he has to go round the keeper, whether he shoots a little bit earlier, what angle he's shooting at, where he's looking for in the goal, how he's receiving the ball, where he's making runs, and that information will layer over the course of the season and the year ahead. And it's that impact that we will have on players which will be critical for the years to come. Teamwork, again, that is the focus of this set of the whole session and everything that we're doing this year. So do players understand what teamwork is? Are they demonstrating this at all times? Now, this is off the pitch as well. Are they coming to the events? Is it just about training and games for them? Are we seeing that level of commitment of, okay, there might be 10 events that we plan through the club this year. Have they turned up to at least 2? It's okay if they haven't turned up to others. They might have other kids, they might have other commitments, they might have been in work all week, they might have been training, and then to come back out to an afternoon event, they might just want a bit of downtime as a family, and that's okay. But it's about looking at going, right, we got an event here, 5 of my boys have turned up, can I do something with them? Can we have a little fun team activity at this event together? Does a player understand what we mean to play as a team, what the expectations are? Now, the interpretation, so every time you say something, does the player really understand what you're saying to them? Have they taken that in a different way? Are the instructions clear enough for them to understand? Have you done a demonstration? A player might have different thoughts to you on what you've asked them to do, and ask if they understand. So again, I've done this last night. I gave some information. I asked the team a question, and I said, do you understand? And one of the players said yes. And I said, okay, can you tell me what I mean by this? And he couldn't. Now, you put the player on the spot a little bit, but if he has that understanding, he should give you that information back straight away. But what it actually meant was one player maybe had a little bit of knowledge, but it wasn't exactly what we were looking for. Or it might be saying, yes, I do understand, because they're scared to say they don't understand. And by me addressing the fact that he didn't really know what it was, meant that, okay, how can I give this information in a different way? Or can I do a demonstration? And it meant that I could give him some feedback where he was really able to learn from that session and really have a learning objective which he could take away. Again, in that white box, sessions must be fun, they must be challenging, and you must address the needs of every player. They must have a focused learning objective per session. So what was the point of last night? Well, the point of last night for us as coaches was to look at the team in terms of positioning and their roles, and to look at preparing for the game on Sunday. But the player objective was to understand that there is going to be rotation in the year, there is going to be teamwork, there is going to be problems that they are going to face, that they have to have resilience, and they must come together as a team to overcome the problems which they face on a matchday environment ahead of Sunday. Now, again, here's another concept map in terms of what we want the players to do on and off the pitch. So giving that feedback, making sure it's direct. So that terminal feedback, when we called those players over, we gave them some feedback. That is direct because it is to them one-to-one. where we need to give them that information which they can really take it on board. Now, I linked in a bit of homework last night, so I wrote down a player, Drogba, that I wanted one of our younger players to look at. I want him to answer me some questions, and I set him some free questions, and I give him a little bit of homework. So when he comes in next week, I say, right, what did you watch? What did you learn? How did he play? Now, you observed him play, and you've told me this. Can you do that in the session now? So then you're relating that into the session. So you're generating that learning. Can we utilize their home time to go onto YouTube, to have that visual learning? Now, again, we want to consider the type of communication. What tone of voice are we using? How are we talking to the players? Am I standing up, talking at them? Am I being aggressive? Or am I being quite calm and open? Am I being energetic? Am I being really dull and low and giving my feedback? Or am I bringing the team together as a group? Now, your tone of voice will impact the learning, the directness, the type of relationship you have, the fun of the session, how a player feels, their feelings, their understanding. Because you might be really aggressive, for example, and they're taking none of that information in, or they're scared to come and ask you a question. Now, these are just types of examples, so just consider that. Now, in your communication, you must be really clear. So you might give loads and loads and loads of information, but how much is that player really taking away? You have to remember he's only 10, 11 years of age, so he might only remember one word you said. Now, you ask him what that word means next week, and he might have no understanding of it because he's completely forgot. And that's where we have to just be clear. We have to be consistent. We can give that direct feedback. We can set that little bit of homework, and we just keep emphasizing the message over and over again. Okay, in here I've set some considerations for coach and player. So coach is green, player is red. So again, just understanding what their understanding is, or having a consideration, how we're observing that. What are the expectations of the coach? What are the expectations of the players? What standards of the coaches? What standards of the players are? How much effort the coach is making and how much effort the player is making. Again, you can read all of this and take this away without me explaining too much within that. But when I mean standards for the coach, that means being a role model at all times, setting the standards for every player, being considerate of who's around us and what is being said. So, for example, if a parent like last night was on the side and they were perhaps listening into a conversation whereby a certain comment was made in reference to something else, then does that parent really need to hear that comment which was made, for example? So that is just a scenario, and considering the fact that who's around us, what information we're giving, and what our environment is at all times. Now, some considerations for the year ahead. Are we being innovative in our sessions? Are they really repetitive? Now, the session plan and the schedule looks very generic. It looks very repetitive over the weeks to come, but that's where you bring in innovation. That's where you lead and coach as that role model. That's where you bring in new ideas and start to adapt and transition and progress and really look at the suitability of the players, look at the quality of the sessions, what experience do the players have, how are they learning. That experience also relates to the environment and how they're having fun and what they're entering into and what they're coming away from. We must collaborate as a team. We must collaborate as coaches. Has the session been personalised? So are we challenging players individually? Do they have certain conditions in that game? Have we set up individual learning? Have we been flexible as a coach? Well, actually, I had 15 confirmed and it's only 8 turned up. Well, actually, do I really want to do a technical session in winter tonight for an hour? No, I might get that flexibility, scrap my session plan, and just play games for an hour and have loads of fun with the team and just get them together and to go away from winter training, to go home in the warmth after, to go and say they've had fun at training tonight, and then we go again on Sunday on the game and we try and get some players in for the session next week, but just being flexible. Are we being efficient in our time? So for our drinks breaks, are they a minute long max? And that is a long time as well, mind. But is it a minute considering we've only got an hour? How many of those breaks have we had? Or is it, all right, we've actually taken 5 minutes here, the players are on the side chatting, they're going a bit cold because we're in winter training, we're now setting this up, we've had to move this, this and this, or is it really efficient where we can just pick this up, just slightly move that in a little bit, and that's taking us about a minute, minute and a half, absolute tops, okay? Again, there's a bit more detail here which you can read into, again, ask me any questions, but these are some considerations that you must really be open to across the entire course of the season. Now, I've just done a comparison between what our traditional types of coaches are and what our adaptive coaches currently want to be. Do you want to be a traditional coach and perhaps being left behind a little bit? Or do you want to be adaptive and really forward thinking and being at the forefront of the innovation, and by bringing in new types of sessions, that energy to go with it? You decide on what kind of coach you want to be. And these are some considerations that I really want you to think about and who you're going to be for the year ahead. Now, I set up the role of the coach, so we must emphasize with our players, understand what they're going through at home, understand what they're struggling with, how we can be positive, how we're creating a fun environment, how we're creating team cohesion, how we create that environment, how we're creating sessions that meet the needs of the players, making sure we're being welcoming. So a prototype, if we're delivering a session and it doesn't work, that's okay. We might look at delivering that session again next week, but we might change some of the concepts, we might change the instructions, we might change the conditions, or we might scrap it all together and come up with a complete new session. That's where your innovation comes in, and it's okay because we're learning as coaches as well at all times. Have we tested that session? So I might have planned it, I might have tested it with the players, it didn't work, that's okay. Define. So what I mean by this is that we must have training objectives and match day objectives. So today's objective is about us working a team and looking at our positioning in and out of possession. Very, very basic for some very young players. Our match day objective might be, let's have fun. Let's go out there, let's have fun, let's learn and really challenge ourselves. This week, in game 2, our next objective for this match day is to be really competitive, to be really strong as a team, to support one another. So what is your match day objective? Follow the roadmap that I gave you at the start to really help define your objectives and what I want you to achieve in phase 1 and phase 2. Phase 1, again, being September to December. Phase 2 is January to March. Now, again, some really key support areas for the players. So these are different learning types. So have the players visualize what I want them to do. So again, that demonstration, have I given a demo alongside an explanation, or have I just spoken to them and expected them to get on with it? Have I used the coaching wheel? Have I given interventions? Have I shown a player one-to-one how to do something? Have I stopped the session to recreate a scenario and then to go and repeat that kind of action, so we give that visual learning? Kinesthetic means that players are doing it on themselves, that they're having an opportunity. So again, that warm-up that I did last night, we had an opportunity for kinesthetic learning, for also visualization, for also auditory. We might ask lots of questions, which again, I've given you examples of this throughout. I gave you examples of this last night, and there's some key points at the bottom which will really help you. This document, again, printed out as a whole document, read over it, ask me questions. We might be having reading and writing. You're going, well, we're not sat in a classroom. Well, actually, I use a lot of tactics boards, so I might be explaining something to a player, and then they might move one of the widgets on the tactics board, or they might get the pen off me and say, oh, right, does the player move into here? And that's where a bit of reading and writing, because they're being curious about their learning and they're really engaging in it, and it does really help them learn. This is so important, and I demoed this last night in the session. So what you saw last night was the use of the coaching wheel, how we considered the 4-corner model, we considered the learning types, how I gave certain types of feedback, different types of communication, how we brought the team together, how I set an objective, how we transitioned, how we utilized equipment, how we set up, how efficient and effective that was, and that's all in within an hour session. Okay, here's a little bit more information on the basic technicals. So again, it's very self-explanatory. You can take this away. You can really build upon the technical areas at the start, which I really outline that I want the players to work on for the year ahead. And these are just some basic questions that I want you to consider and to really plan in for every session that you do for the year ahead. Now I've included some question techniques, so again this is really important for you to take this away. So I've asked an open question last night, so who understands this? Do you understand what I mean by this? Again, open questions are usually how, what, where, who and why, but just by asking, do you understand this, is an open question of going, oh, I do understand this, however, I don't know what you mean when you say this, right? And it gives an opportunity for me to address that situation, as I've already given you an example for. Now, there's also opportunities where we tell players what to do, we explain it, and then we describe the action to them. That is kinesthetic learning, and then we get a demonstration in there. It also means that we can problem solve. So have the players had an opportunity to understand what we're asking of them? Have we provided possible solutions? So for an example, players are struggling, they perhaps haven't met the learning objectives of the course of the session, and that might be something for us to consider, but have we created a solution which is beneficial to them? We might ask leading questions, which is really helpful, so it also relates to a bit of a shit sandwich in a way, but also by going, during the session we worked as a group within midfield to score that goal. Is this something we want to do as a team? So it means, yes, it is something we want to do as a team. And if a player says no, then we need to look at the principles and we need to address that with the players. But it gives a bit of a leading question in terms of that's what you're looking for. Now, signposting. So in a moment, you will need a ball. Now, all the balls were on the side of the session, but they're already looking around where the ball is. We might have just lost their concentration for a second or two, but it just means that we've signposted them to what we wanted to do. Now, signposting will come in greater detail as we do more work with them, but that's a very, very basic concept for our type of group. Again, probing questions. So just to make sure I understand what you're asking me, can you tell me what you're struggling with? So you might not understand what that player is saying to you. You might just say, can you tell me in a different way? Can you repeat that for me? Or is it this that you're struggling with? And they might go, no, I mean this. And for young players, it can be quite hard for them to explain themselves, but just be supportive of them. Now, if a player doesn't give you the answer you want first time, then that's why you use this technique, these types of questions, to really help them learn, to try and understand areas as a coach that you need to support them with, and how we can work closer with them as a team and create that unity to ensure we're creating a learning environment at all times. Now, I just want you to consider the player's emotional response and their indicators. So, noticing emotions, so players will notice your emotions. So if you become very irate on the side over the course of the season, your players will notice that. And again, it might put little Joey off from returning to the session next week, or it might mean that they're looking at you going, oh, if Campbell does that, I can do that. So that relates into how you express your emotions. And it also it relates to how they're expressing theirs. Within a session, they might be really struggling, and then they may become really frustrated. How do you address that as a coach? Is that okay? Yes, at times it is. How do we support them within that? How do we manage their emotions? Do they understand their emotion management? And that is core for how we work with them over the next course of the year, from going non-competitive into competitive. Have we spoken to the players about what they're struggling with? How can we create an environment that allows players to show their emotions? There is so much within this camp, I know there's a lot to really compress and take away, but that's why I'm recording this video for you to come back with at any time. And that's why you've got this document, and that's why you've got accessibility to me through messages, or for me to help in training, or to be at training anytime, for you to ask me anything. So this is just again some considerations to a question I asked earlier on in terms of how do we observe player development, or how do we monitor that? And this is just some areas. So are we looking at preparation? How are we supporting players? What does our technical practice look like? And our players growing across that, okay? So really refer back to this document because it will help you as much as possible. Now, again, here's some feedback types, and I utilised this last night. So I gave some informal feedback to a player last night. I used concurrent and terminal feedback, and we were constructive. Now, formal feedback is where I went and spoke to one of the parents about what I wanted their son to work on for the week ahead, and that just means that I can have a little bit of conversation about utilising the parent to support them in their learning and how can they do it at home, which really benefits and complements what we're doing as a team, building that team cohesion, building in individual learning, setting some objectives, and having a bit of relationship with the parent at the same time as well. Again, please print this off, or please have it to hand, or please keep referring to it at all times, because this document will really help you. I remember your tone, your voice, how you deliver that feedback, when, where, how. Am I going to deliver feedback to a player who's really frustrated at the end of the session, or am I going to just have that breathing space with them and then address it with them and maybe their parent on Tuesday at the end of the session? Just say, I did notice this on Sunday, I didn't want to address it then, and I just wanted to address it here at the end of training. Now, sometimes that's not always a good thing because we're opening up the door too much, but I also don't want players thinking, or parents thinking, that we've ignored when their player has been upset, or the players thought that you've ignored them, etc. So it's that very fine balance and understanding what our group, our parents, our stakeholders are all about. Again, very quickly, just your session planning, very, very basic, some considerations, very straightforward. I think I've gone into some detail within this. Dynamic warm-ups is what I showed you last night, and a static might just be where they're stretching, they're standing around, and we might do this a little bit in summer, so as they get a little bit older, it just means we can have a bit of a conversation with the players and we can utilise our environment around us, so i.e. the weather as a physical condition and consideration, to go, actually, we don't want too much of a dynamic warm-up because it is very hot tonight, for example. And the opposite way, in winter, we don't want players doing lots of static warm-ups, we want them doing more dynamic. So here is a bit more of the 4-layer funnel diagram of the strategy that I really want you to look at in what I want you to do this year, and really build upon all the points that I've given you. Now, very quickly, this is the 4-corner model. This is from the English FA, but the FAW use one as well. I just couldn't find their model. So this is, again, those 4 areas which I spoke about at the start. I set you some questions to really consider how to answer, what you need to focus on, and for you to take away that type of information. So if you could look at this in a bit more detail, and if you've got any questions, please come to me. You're more than welcome. Now, this is a basic session for players. Do we have an arrival activity? Do we have a warm-up? Do we have a technical? Do we have a game? So last night, the arrival activity was for players to pass in 1-2s, not shooting, just passing, getting their number of touches up, making sure the session's really organised, make sure that they're communicating, and shooting will come in at the start of the session. Now, that's you setting your standards, your principles, those expectations for when players arrive, what they need to do, and consistently. And it means that we can transition into a warm-up very quickly, then into our technical, and then into our SSG. Again, any questions, please ask me, but I think this is pretty straightforward, and I want you to focus a lot on a basic session plan and how you can build upon that, but it also will relate to the session plan that I give you over the schedule one, which I will record and give to you by the end of the weekend. So here's some helpful tips for you to plan your sessions. Again, very self-explanatory. Any questions, please ask me, but I hope this is pretty straightforward to give you that benefit. Now, one final one I want us to consider: do players have additional learning needs and disabilities? So a player might have global delay, and what that means is that it may take an individual some time to process the information you've given them, and they may not get it as quickly as other players. Now, players might have a disability as well, and I want us to consider how inclusive we are. I want us to consider how we're communicating with them, how they're understanding the information, what roles could they play within the team, and how we manage that. But as a club, we will support you with the bigger disabilities if we're in that position where a player approaches us, etc. But ALN might be undiagnosed. You might have a player with ADHD. We might have a player who has autism, and they might not be focusing. They might be very focused on the grass or the clouds or what is going on around them rather than focusing on the pitch. Now, that we want that focus to be there, and it's all about how we work, how we communicate, how we have that relationship, but supporting that ALN. And over the course of the year, it will come in time, and it's just about being consistent with them. But we can talk about that in greater detail, but I want you to consider any additional learning needs and disabilities that the players may have. Now, no one might have told you that one of the players has got an additional learning need, but you might consider this as a coach and go, right, this is my feedback and how I give it. Whether in time, I've spoken about this in detail. Processes, again, types of session and planning, and I've spoken about how that relates to your approach, what the focus is, what the processes is, and the scope. Again, very self-explanatory. So there it says marketing versus sales. So it is literally that, how we're marketing the club, how we're marketing the sessions to the players, and have we sold it to the players? Have we sold it to the parents? Have we made the process efficient enough where the players buy into us and buy into that process? Do they understand what our expectations is? Do they understand what the principles are? There's loads within this to really take away. I know this has been an hour, but this is like a mini CPD. There is so much content which I really want to support you with, and rather than just chuck a document at you and maybe a 5-minute voice note, I wanted some visualization to go through this with some auditory, and then your opportunity is to have kinesthetic learning where you do this yourself, and then I will support you with this. And if you come back to this video 10 times over the course of the season, right, actually, at this time stamp I want to learn about this, at this time stamp I want to learn about that, then there is lots of information, lots to take away that I can support you with over the course of the season. Again, I cannot keep emphasizing, everything you must do, you must refer back to this document. You must come to me with some questions. I'm open to you. I'm available to come to sessions, take sessions, lead, support, assist, whatever. I am here for you, okay? This is a supporting document which I hope has helped you. And the 6, 7, 8 hours that I put into creating this document and making sure it's all refined and pretty straightforward, I hope I've condensed this within an hour, but it will help you for a majority of much bigger time consideration over the course of the season. Thanks for listening. I hope you've listened to this right throughout. This is Coach Luca, and you can check this out on YouTube at the Reflective Coach Podcast. And I hope that you subscribe, like, listen. And if you're not Campo and you're someone else listening to this coaching resource, I hope this has helped you in some way. And I hope that you've taken as much information away as possible. And if you want to reach out on socials for more support or one-to-ones or mentoring or how you set your sessions up or some feedback, then I hope this does help you. If you're someone else is listening and maybe raised other questions or maybe thought I haven't agreed with what he said there, again, what I said throughout this is there is a perspective towards the players and the coach that I've geared this towards. And in the back of my mind, when I'm talking about certain levels of information that you may have disagreed with, it's about basing this upon the players that I have observed and that I've met to try and meet their needs and trying to condense this into a short to long-term plan which meets their needs.
But yeah, we try to be that group that can help be there for the players as a 3, because I think you mentioned earlier, you want to have different characters in the changing room. You want to have different personalities. You don't want the same kind of people because you're not going to be able to move forward. If you've got 10 people and they all agree the same things, you're going to get to a point in time where actually you're going to become unstuck. You need that one person to actually be like, nah, I don't agree with that. Or actually, we should try this. And I think that's why the huddle works, is we're all quite different as human beings. And I think you need 3 different people in there, because some players will naturally gravitate towards me and my personality, but equally some might go to the other 2, and that's absolutely fine.